Hi folks, hope you're okay today. It's good to be with you. I just want to share my thoughts about the situation that's happened over the last couple of weeks and give you my thoughts. We've had a number of terror incidents, awful atrocities, and heart-rending, heartbreaking incidents of innocent people who have been butchered on our streets by Islamic extremists, jihadists. And I just want to offer my thoughts concerning the times and the age that we are living in. We're living in a savage age. And as a Christian, what do? How do we react to this situation? I think what we need to realize is that Islamic Jihadism that we've seen over the last few weeks and last couple of years that is directed from the Middle East has a long-term strategy. There's a long-term strategy involved here, and that strategy is they're willing to wait for how many years they are willing, or however long it takes, but they are willing to wait and chip away at Western culture until they subdue it. So all this jihadism that's going on, the bombing, the killings, the slaughter in London, and this is a long-term strategy that they have, where bit by bit, little by little, they try to wear us down over many, many, many years, till eventually they take over that culture. And this is a strategy that they've been doing for a number of years in many, many countries. And when they reach a tipping point, they begin to cause civil war in nations when they get to a stronger position. But in the West, they've not got that stronger position. So at the moment, they're just willing just to chip away and chip away and chip away over many, many years. So in other words, this is a long-term strategy that these jihadists have. Now, the sad thing is our politicians are dealing with this long-term strategy that the jihadists have with short-termism. They're trying to deal with it just off the cuff. A bomb happens, murders happen, they come on TV, they say, oh, how terrible, they do a few things, but it's off the cuff. There's no long-term thinking, no long-term strategy involved in how to defeat these jihadists. And it's not a battle in terms of the physical, in terms of violence and war. The battle is ideological, and it's an ideological battle that is not being fought and won. And we as Christians need to realize that this is a long-term fight. It's a long-term battle. And our weapons are spiritual. Our weapons are in the heavenlies. And what we have to do is realize that these jihadists are going for a long-term strategy of taking over Europe. So we've got to have a long-term strategy of Christianizing Europe. We've got to have a strategy of a long-term missionary strategy of planting churches in France, in Germany, and around the UK, and creating Christian institutions, creating institutions that can influence the politicians. Because sadly, the political correct ideology is not strong enough. It's weak to be able to deal with what's happening, and we're seeing really the manifestation of that weakness is the fact that the trying to take on jihadism is basically ineffectual in the West, and that is because of the ineffectualness of political correctness. Because political correctness is not allowing people to deal with the real issue, and the real issue is ideology. There is an ideology behind the jihadism that comes out of the Quran. And if we're not allowed to criticize the Quran and engage intellectually against the Quran and critique the Quran intellectually, then we're never going to be able to deal with the ideology that's behind the jihadism. And so the political correctness is actually causing the problem, manifesting the problem, because it's not allowing us to deal with the ideological issue. It's not a military issue, it's an ideological issue, and it's an issue that the jihadists are going to continue to manifest themselves ideologically, expressed in military terms, and this will continue as a war of attrition upon the West. And no amount of political correct politicians who do deal with things off the cuff is going to stop it. So we need to realize as Christians that the only ideology that can defeat Islam, especially the Islam that they express, the jihadists, is by the gospel of Jesus Christ, that by Jesus Christ who died and rose again. That is the only way. And unless the nations become stronger in that ideology of the gospel, then once you have a strong ideology in your nations of being a gospel people, then you have a stronger ideology, because this ideology is based and rooted in the love of Christ. It will negate and offset the power of the Islamic extremist ideology of the jihadist. So we have to have a long-term strategy over the next 10 years to continue to plant churches in France, in Germany, throughout the whole of the West, to set up theological seminaries, missionary stations, to call in more missionaries, train up more pastors, to be more biblical. And that's what we need to be doing, and we need to be seeing that this is a long-term battle for the West. We're seeing the collapse of the secularism, we're seeing the collapse of political correctness before our very eyes. There's going to be a moral, spiritual and political vacuum within that, which will cause more and more upset in the nations, more and more violent confrontations. But in the midst of that turmoil, we need to just be principled and get on and do the task that we're called to do, and that is proclaim the gospel and Christianize the nations. That's what we need to be doing. So it's a case of get down in prayer, get down in the Bible, and get down in praying and having this long-term strategy. You've got to have this long-term principled strategy of planting churches and proclaiming the gospel in the nations of the West, and realize that these jihadists have a long-term strategy of a principled takeover of the West, and it's he who has the strongest will win, and we have to be strong in our resolution to proclaim the gospel in these days. When a storm comes, well, I remember when I was in the Lake District once, and a storm came, and our team and another team had to put up a tent, and the team in one team put up their tent in the midst of the storm, and they got dry, and our team was messing about not getting the tent up while the storm was coming, and we all got wet. When the storm's coming, we can either panic and say, oh, these jihadists, oh, this, what are we going to do, and bomb the living daylights out of them, whatever. We could come up with all these ideas, and we're all panicky, but what we have to do is put up the tent of proclaiming the gospel, put up the tent of church mission, put up the tent of building institutions that are Christian within the West, academic institutions, seminaries, plant churches. We need to be getting out there and proclaiming and doing missionary work. That is the answer to the threat of jihadism. There's only three ways: either to be jihadist and become Islamic extremist, either follow secularism, which is collapsing and falling apart, or to proclaim the gospel. That is the only way. Those are the only ways, and the true way is to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in the midst of these dark days. When Irenaeus saw his city destroyed by Roman troops and decimated because of the Gnostic gossip, When he went back to Gaul, he just preached the gospel and stood standing for the gospel. That is what we need to be doing today. Read the book of Philippians. God bless you.